In September 2003, three young Singaporean students were sharing an ordinary apartment in Sydney. They were far from home, studying in Australia, living the kind of life many international students know well. Lectures, rent, routines, and the quiet pressure of building a future in a country that was not their own. But one morning, inside that apartment, everything changed. Two of them would never make it out alive. At first, the case seemed to point outward to strange sightings, possible intruders, and the terrifying idea that danger had entered their home from outside. But as investigators looked closer, the story became far more complicated. Timelines shifted, suspicions changed, and a case that seemed like it should have had a clear answer became one of the most unsettling double murder mysteries in Sydney. This is the case of Tay Chow Lyang, Tony Po Chuan, and Puneet Tiwary. Three students, one Sydney apartment, and a question that still refuses to rest. Who really killed two of them? Hi everyone, welcome to the Desi Crime Podcast, a show where we dive deep into some of the craziest cases from around South Asia. I'm your host Aishwarya.
And I'm Aryan.
And the case that I have for you today is one that shook Sydney's South Asian community.
Aishwarya, speaking of crazy stories, the story you covered on our exclusive Patreon episode last month, I listened to it just, I think, yesterday. What a crazy story of this woman named Donna Winger.
Absolutely mind-blowing story. When I first heard about it, as a little teaser trailer to all of you who aren't on our Patreon, it's the story of this young woman. She's traveling from the airport in Illinois back to her home, and she has what anyone would describe as a harrowing cab ride back home, right? She has this really erratic cab driver. She's terrified. She goes back home, tells her husband what she's experienced. And just days after that, it seems like that cab driver entered her home, killed her, and then was killed by her husband in the process. So there's two bodies lying in this home. It seems like an open and shut case. This crazy cab driver entered this woman's home, tried to attack her.
Oh, but it's not.
But it's not. There is so much more to it. And that's what we get into in the episode.
If you want to listen to that exclusive episode, you can become a patron or a YouTube member in the link below. Every month you get one crazy case. But we also have an absolutely crazy case lined up for you today.
Yeah.
It is one that cuts through Indian origin people all the way to Singapore.
University students.
And Australia and this and that. And it's the case, once you told me you're going to cover this, I was so excited because this was a landmark case.
And one that I've wanted to cover for a really, really long time. I keep bringing it up in meetings that I have and then my conversations with Arya that I want to cover this one. And I just haven't gotten the chance to until today.
So without further ado, take us to wherever we're going.
But before we get on with the episode, we need to let you all know that you can now get early access to all Desi Crime episodes on Amazon Music. To get your fix a whole 3 days before anyone else, go download the Amazon Music app today. It was just after 2:30 in the afternoon on Monday, the 15th of September 2003, when two ambulances turned into Barker Street, a leafy, unremarkable residential road in Kingsford, a suburb in the east of Sydney, Australia. The ambulances pulled up outside a red brick duplex. Tidy front garden, low brick fence. Nothing about this building announced itself as a place where anything unusual had ever happened. And then, a young man came running towards them. He was 24 years old, and his name was Puneet Tiwary. His jumper was on inside out. His hands were smeared with blood. The moment they saw him, the paramedics locked their doors as a precaution, while one of them cracked the window just enough to hear him. Ram was breathing hard, barely forming sentences, and kept glancing down at his own hands as though he couldn't explain them, couldn't account for what was on them. He told the paramedics that he was the one who had called them, that he had found one of his flatmates on the floor, bloody and frothing at the mouth. When police arrived moments later, Ram tried to make sense of it with them. He said he had been in his bedroom sleeping as he often did in the afternoon. He worked a part-time security guard job that ran through the weekends and nights, and daytime sleep was how he recovered. He told the first responding sergeant that he had been woken at some point by the sound of the television blaring from the lounge room and something falling. He thought nothing of it. People dropped things, and so he went back to sleep. But then he woke up again. This time the noise was different. Over the loud volume of the TV still blaring, he heard someone run past his bedroom door. He thought he heard his flatmate Tony shout the word help, but he told police he couldn't be completely sure about that. Then someone pounded on his door. Ram's first instinct was that someone was trying to break in. He stayed where he was. He heard what sounded like metal striking something over and over for what felt like several minutes. And then silence. Ram waited inside in fear, and then a little while later gathered courage and opened his door. To his left, the back door of the lounge room was slightly ajar. To his right, slumped against the front door with his back against the wall and his head resting on his chest, was his flatmate Tony. Blood had pooled around him. A baseball bat and a kitchen knife lay on the floor by his side. Terrified that whoever had done this was still inside, Ram picked up the bat and made his way through the apartment. And that's when he saw it. In the lounge room, behind the couch, he found his other flatmate, Tay Chow Lyang, lying face down in a pool of blood, his head completely caved in. Ram ran back to his room. He locked the door. He pulled a chair across it as a barricade. And that's when he called emergency services.
When you say his head was caved in, you mean like bludgeoned?
Bludgeoned from the bat, possibly.
I need the ambulance and the police. There's been a murder. My two friends are lying dead outside. There's blood all over the place.
What I want to know is exactly what has happened there.
I have no idea. I was asleep and I heard this screaming, and when I tell my two friends are dead.
The operator told him to stay put. She asked if his flatmates were definitely dead or possibly just unconscious. Ram said there was too much blood to tell. She asked if he knew CPR. He did. He had learnt it during national service back in Singapore. But he told her he couldn't bring himself to try. Both Tony and Tay's faces were so covered in blood, he just couldn't do it. The operator asked if it was safe for him to go back and check if they were still breathing. Ram's answer, which would later be played in a courtroom more than once, was raw and absolute. I'm not going back outside till somebody gets here. I'm not going back outside. When he was finally told the paramedics had arrived, he took the bat for protection, left his room, walked up to Tony, touched his neck to feel for a pulse, put his hand near his nose to check for breath. He noticed foam around Tony's mouth, blood falling from his nose. And then, as Ram would describe it later, Tony sort of spasmed. Tony Tan Po Chuan was 26 years old. He was barely alive in that moment. Ram went out through the back door and met the paramedics and the police on the street, hands still wet with blood he had not yet tried to wash off. It was 2:30 in the afternoon. The officers climbed the stairs to the second floor of the duplex. The front door was closed but unlocked. They pushed it open and had to physically move Tony's body aside to gain entry. What they found inside was so extreme in its violence that even seasoned investigators would describe it as one of the most brutal scenes they had attended. Tony's head had been struck with such force that parts of his skull and brain were visible. He had also been stabbed 5 times in the neck, one wound deep enough to puncture his voice box. His prescription glasses were smashed to pieces on the lounge room floor. 8 of his front teeth had been knocked clean from his mouth and were scattered across the hallway. Blood was smeared along the walls, across the door frame, and in bloody footprints down the hall. In the lounge room, behind the couch, Tay Chow Lyang lay in a matching pool of blood. Like Tony, he had suffered multiple blows to the head and multiple stab wounds to the neck. The television was still blaring at full volume. A pot of chicken wings was cooking on the stove. 2 young men from Singapore, students a long way from home, were dead on the floor of their flat on Barker Street. And across the city, their families did not know yet. Tay Chow Lyang and Tony Tan Po Chuan were Singaporean men in their mid-20s studying mechanical engineering and electrical engineering at the University of New South Wales in Sydney. Their fees and living expenses were covered by the Singapore Armed Forces. They were military scholarship holders who had completed national service back home and were now pursuing engineering degrees that would eventually see them serving as officers. The scholarships were prestigious and came with obligations. Pass your courses, report your results, uphold the standards that have been set for you. And both men took this seriously. Both were conscientious, punctual students who turned in their assignments and kept their heads down. Tony Tan Po Chuan was born on the 3rd of December 1976 and was 26 years old at the time of his death. He was the kind of son who made his parents proud in the most traditional sense of that phrase. His mother would later tell the press that Tony always helped others, including his friends. He had met his wife in an online chat room back in 1998, and the two had married in Singapore just months before his murder. She had visited him in Sydney once, staying at the Barker Street flat. And when police interviewed her after his death, she told them she could not think of a single person who would want to hurt Tony. A forensic examination of his computer confirmed what those who knew him already believed. No evidence of infidelity, no criminal activity, nothing to suggest he felt threatened or in danger. He had been working on his thesis that final morning. He sent 2 emails to his university supervisor, the first at 10:42 a.m. and the second at 11:06 a.m. before shutting down his computer at 12:02 p.m. and walking to campus for his midday lecture and then returning to the apartment after. And then you have Tay Chow Lyang, known by his nickname Charlie Young among the students who knew him, who was born in 1977 and was also 26. Where Tony was social and warm, Tay was quieter. His English was more limited, and he associated mostly with other Singaporean or Asian students. He was a computer enthusiast who spent his spare time online or watching movies at home. His university fees, unlike Tony's, were paid by his parents, who ran a food vendor business back in Singapore. He was also married to a woman named Winnie, who remained in Singapore while he studied. The two had met in high school, married in a registry ceremony, and were planning a proper ceremony once they finished his degree and returned home. But odd detail, classmates noticed that they didn't wear his wedding ring at university. He only put it on when Winnie came to visit. And then there is the detail in Tay's private life that would catch investigators' attention. A forensic search of his computer revealed that in the months before his death, he had been in almost daily online contact with a woman in Singapore named Jasmine. Their messages were often flirtatious and occasionally sexual. Tay had made clear that he had romantic feelings for Jasmine, even though she was engaged to be married to someone else, and he was married. Police looked into this seriously and ran immigration checks. Neither Jasmine nor her fiancé were in Australia at the time of the murders. But regardless of all of this, both men lived modest lives off of modest allowances. Nothing was taken from the flat, no valuables were missing, both had wallets still on them, Tay's in his back pocket, Tony's in his bedroom where he placed it after returning home from his lecture. There was no sign of forced entry into the apartment, not a single window was broken, not a single lock tampered with. Police considered the possibility that this had been a racially motivated attack. In 2003, there had been a wave of crimes targeting Asian students in New South Wales. Just weeks before the Barker Street murders, a 19-year-old Vietnamese student had been strangled to death after a kidnapping attempt went wrong, and a Chinese student had been seized and assaulted while her captors demanded a ransom of 120,000 Australian dollars from her parents in Beijing. It was genuinely a frightening time for the Asian student community in Sydney. But investigators ruled out a racially motivated attack in this case. There was no ransom demanded, no indication the killers had arrived intending to rob anyone, no evidence of anything being taken at all.
Ash, a couple of things I'd like to point out because certain patterns in crimes tend to be indicative of what those patterns may yield. So, for example, the infidelity. The infidelity might make one initially assume that the murder has something to do with that moral crime, right? Infidelity is not a legal crime, it's a moral crime,
Correct.
so to say. And so you conflate the two and maybe say how they're related. But usually what happens in crimes and when people go digging forensically into one's life is that you end up finding dirt that is ancillary to the crime.
Right.
So conflating the two is a knee-jerk response that may or may not prove useful. So that's one thing. The other is coming back to our third flatmate, the one who's still alive. By all means, the final witness, the only witness, is probabilistically the most likely
Right.
suspect. However, his reaction that you have narrated so far has been very, very similar to the pattern I have observed in innocent survivors
Okay.
rather than perpetrators.
And what pattern is that?
Panic that seems authentic, right? Where he is truly worried that there might be, or at least he makes it seem like he's worried that there's somebody outside, so he's not going to go give CPR. If he was the one who had done it, I don't see why he would not tell the police, oh, let me do CPR, so that you appear like you are cooperating.
And the helpful
right?
one,
Yeah,
yeah.
well, you're the helpful one. Because if you have done it, you know for a fact there's nobody else in the house that you need to be fearful of. In this case, he was expressing his true fear. I'm not going to give CPR because I'm scared there's somebody outside. The nature of the, help me, like those things that he said on the call, slightly indicative of authentic panic.
Sure.
But on the other hand, this doesn't look like a robbery at all, because clearly, again, a pattern in crime, which is if there isn't a break-in, the people knew the perpetrator more often than not, because they let the perpetrator inside the house voluntarily.
Correct.
And that's why you don't have signs of break-in. I'm just curious as to where this case is heading, because it has left certain trails of patterns. I don't know if I should believe those patterns.
And there's also something to be said about a tiny apartment student housing in Sydney. How loud is the TV? To me, that is a question mark on the one surviving roommate. And we've seen this question come up in multiple crime scenes. We saw it come up in Arushi Talwar, of how loud is your AC?
Yeah.
How loud is your TV? That there is a whole murder, and in both these cases, a double murder that has taken place in your vicinity.
Yeah.
Yet you have slept through it. To me, how much can that happen?
Yes and no, right? Because I slept through the most vulgar abuses of noise pollution when I used to live in a frat house. And you
Sure.
just get accustomed to it. Otherwise, you'll be an insomniac.
I've slept in the Coldplay concert, so I think.
So
yeah.
like I've slept through insane noise because I got attuned to that. If it was my first night sleeping in a small Singaporean dorm, of course I'd be woken up by the minutest of sounds.
Sure.
If I've been living there for months, like I live in Mumbai, dude, the noise is insane. Like there are cars honking outside my house all night long. I don't hear them.
Sure.
But when a friend from like the States or some who lives in a small town in Europe comes, they can't
Handle
tolerate
that.
it.
Sure.
So there is that also to say about maybe the TV was just masking a baseline level of loudness that he was
Already
attuned to.
exists, yeah. Now, with the robbery theory out of the way, a more uncomfortable question was left behind. If it wasn't a robbery, if it wasn't racial violence, and if both victims were quiet, studious men who by all accounts had no enemies, then who came into that flat on a Monday afternoon and killed them both? And why? So now here is what we know about the morning of Monday, the 15th of September 2003, the day Tay and Tony were killed. The night before had been unremarkable. Ram, who had worked a security shift through the weekend, came home at around 6 in the evening. The three flatmates watched The Lord of the Rings together in the lounge room. They made passing comments about the film, but nothing notable was said. Ram went to bed at around 9:30 p.m. At that point, according to his account, everything was normal. On Monday morning, Ram received a call from his girlfriend Elvira at around 6:30 a.m. They spoke for half an hour and arranged to meet at the university at 2 p.m. Ram got up, had breakfast, showered, but went back to sleep. That is, by his account, the last time he was awake before the sounds in the hallway jolted him from his sleep sometime around 2 p.m. Now here is what was happening outside Ram's bedroom while he says he was sleeping. Tony Tan was at his computer all morning working on his thesis. He sent his final email to his thesis supervisor at 11:06 a.m. and manually shut down his computer at 12:02 p.m. Tay Chow Lyang's computer was last used at 11:58 a.m. Tony and Tay were both enrolled in a midday lecture that day, Mobile and Satellite Communication Systems, a class they attended together almost every week. The two typically woke early, studied for a few hours, and then walked the 5-minute journey to campus together. They valued punctuality. On any normal Monday, they would have been at their seats before the lecture began. But on this particular Monday, something was different. Tay Chow Lyang did not show up to the lecture at all. This was notable. Multiple classmates confirmed he hadn't been there. Investigators noted that at the time of his death, Tay was dressed in trousers and a jumper with his wallet in his back pocket, the way he dressed when he was leaving the flat or expecting visitors. Those who knew him said that if he was simply staying at home, he would have been in shorts and a t-shirt. He had dressed for something, maybe just not for class. Tony, on the other hand, did make it to the lecture, but he arrived 15 minutes late and alone. His classmates immediately noticed something was wrong. His usually neat, gelled hair was messy and disheveled. He seemed distracted, restless. One classmate asked why he was late. Tony smiled and vaguely said nothing. Several people noticed that throughout the lecture, Tony kept turning his head around and looking around, as though scanning the room or keeping a watch for something outside. He told a classmate that he and Tay had to cancel a meeting they had planned with another student after class, giving no explanation for why, simply saying that Tay had something he needed to do instead. When the lecture ended early at around 1:50 p.m., Tony stayed to chat with some classmates, but observers noticed he was agitated, shaking from side to side. One friend asked what was going on. Tony said he urgently needed to use the toilet. Another classmate noted he seemed tired but otherwise normal, and Tony said that he was going home to go sleep. Tony then left the lecture hall and began walking up the outdoor staircase that led off campus towards Willis Street, the usual route home. Just before 2 p.m., he passed a friend named Jonathan. Jonathan asked how he was doing, but instead of the warm, friendly response Jonathan was used to, Tony kind of grunted back. "It's going good," he said, and just kept walking straight. Jonathan watched as Tony made his way towards a vehicle that was parked at the top of the staircase on Willis Street. He noticed because the car was facing the wrong way in a one-way street and it parked directly in front of a no stopping sign. It was suspicious. Jonathan could see 2 or 3 people inside the car, all of them Asian, none of whom he recognized. He watched as Tony took his backpack off and approached the car's open door. And then Tony got in. Jonathan found this odd enough that it stayed with him. He knew Tony lived close enough to walk home in 5 minutes. Why was he getting in a car he'd never seen with people who didn't seem familiar? A second witness, Jonathan's friend Chuan, was also with him and also saw the car and its occupants. Chuan specifically remembered Tony removing his backpack before getting in. The car drove away. Tony was inside it. At around 2:20 p.m., Ram Tiwary called emergency services. So between Tony getting into that car at just before 2 p.m. and Ram placing the emergency call at 2:20 p.m., something happened on Barker Street. But here is where the forensic picture becomes genuinely strange and significantly more complicated than just one afternoon's events. The pathology evidence indicated that Tay Chow Lyang had not died at the same time as Tony. When forensic scientists examined Tay's brain, they found the presence of a substance called amyloid precursor protein, known as beta-APP. This protein only forms in brain tissue when at least 2 hours have elapsed between a severe brain injury and the time of death. In other words, Tay Chow Lyang had been attacked and rendered critically injured not minutes before Ram called the ambulance, but at least 2 hours earlier. This placed the attack on Tay at somewhere around midday, consistent with the last use of his computer at 11:58 a.m., while Tony was still sitting in his lecture hall, looking distracted and glancing around the room. This meant someone had come into that flat at approximately midday, crept up behind Tay Chow Lyang as he sat at his low computer desk, and struck him in the head from behind with a blunt object. The force was so extreme that it fractured Tay's skull and caused catastrophic brain damage. The tip of Tay's left index finger was nearly amputated, suggesting he had raised his hand to his head after the first blow and was struck again. And yet, Tay did not die immediately. He lay there in the lounge room for 2 hours while the killer either waited or left and returned. When Tony came home through that front door sometime after 2 p.m., the attacker was still there or had come back. The evidence suggested he used the front door because he put the chicken wings on to cook and took his shoes off, which he would not have done if he had come through the back entrance and instantly seen Tay's body. From the kitchen, Tony walked towards the lounge room. That is where the attacker met him head-on. Tony's glasses were smashed off and his face was hit with the first blow.
Okay, some quick housekeeping. One is that of Tay and Tony, which one was the one who had allegations of infidelity that were uncovered?
That's Tay, who's also the one who stayed back in the apartment.
Got it. And Tony's the one that showed up late, 15 minutes
for
late.
his lecture.
Now, hypothetically, because so far what you have narrated is from the perspective of there being an extra killer, right?
Correct, a third person.
Yeah, third person or fourth person technically.
Yeah.
Let's assume Tony had something to do with Tay's initial head injury.
Sure.
Could that have happened in the current timeline? Because the class was at midday.
Correct.
Right? He showed up 15 minutes late to that class, which is atypical of him.
Yeah.
As we have concluded.
Correct.
He was behaving atypically in that class.
Yes.
So let's say he showed up at the class at 12:15. The forensic examiner said that Tay died or was injured 2 hours roughly before Ram made the call.
Correct.
Which was 2 p.m.-ish,
Yeah.
the call. So it is possible that Tay did something or had something to do with Tony's injury.
Timeline-wise, it is possible.
Timeline-wise, it is possible.
But there are
Correct.
no recovered clothes with blood on it. None of that found within Tony's belongings.
Got
and
it.
obviously also Tony went on to die as well.
Tony went on to die. Yeah. My brain's just at like hypothesizing, what if Tony's erratic behavior had something to do with his knowledge of what had happened to Tay at around noon.
How interesting. And then he returned back to an apartment that he knew was possibly dangerous, where then he was
Not
also
dangerous insofar as he knew he was the one who did it. So it wouldn't be
killed.
dangerous
So there are
to
two
him.
killers completely working separately from each
Yeah,
other.
I'm not, because he entered a car with 3 or 4 people, multiple people, right? I'm assuming, what if I'm just spitballing here, right?
course.
If that group of people had something to do with Tay's injury, he returned home with that group of people and somehow they ended up killing him too. Because the other thing is, I find it hard to believe that somebody's been dead in a house or severely injured and unconscious, an injury that is so
Graphic.
egregious that when you enter the house after 2 hours, you don't smell anything. I mean, I don't think the smell would be too strong. I don't think rigor mortis would have set in.
No, not quite.
But for you to have the time to put chicken wings on the stove, switch on the TV, whether or not you entered via the back door.
But even if there is sometimes like a little bit of a smell in a home, it's not like you put everything on pause to go figure it out, right?
yeah, but you don't go to cook chicken wings either.
You don't?
I mean, I just find it,
What is an alarming smell? And I don't think what he would have smelled at that 2-hour mark would have been so alarming that if he had other things to get to, like he had stuff to do or he was so tired he just wanted to go to bed, he seemed like there was something on his mind too. I don't think there would have been that strong a smell.
Yeah.
I do get your point that he should have stumbled on it, but obviously he did as well.
That to me is not even the biggest flag. To me, it's his erratic behavior and the
Is really
plausibility of the
weird.
timeline
Yeah.
and multiple witnesses reporting his erratic behavior. That makes me wonder, somehow he has knowledge that there is some preceding variable
Yeah.
that is affecting his
I
behavior.
get your theory and it's so interesting, but to me it's so implausible that there are 2 killers in this theory. One killer has ended up dead after committing the first crime.
Yeah.
And there is a second killer who's acted completely independently of the first killer and killed the killer. That
Yeah.
to me is just, that's so crazy. What would prompt something like that? That's,
Just a hypothesis.
yeah, just a theory. Crazy. Now, somewhere in that lounge room, Tony was met with the attacker. That's when he got the first blow. His glasses were knocked off. All 8 of his front teeth were knocked out. His nose was fractured and his jaw was broken. Blood smears and displaced furniture showed that Tony, bleeding and barely conscious, managed to stagger down the hallway in an attempt to escape. There, he was struck at least 12 more times, causing massive skull fractures. He was then stabbed 5 times in the neck. Tay, still barely alive in the lounge room, was stabbed in the neck again as well, what forensic examiners believed was a final act to ensure he was dead. And here is one last detail that investigators could not resolve, and which would become one of the most important points in the courtroom battles to come. The baseball bat and the kitchen knife found at the scene next to Tony's body both showed traces of Tony's blood and DNA, natural. But neither showed a single trace of Tay Chow Lyang's blood or DNA. Not one spot. Despite the fact that Tay had sustained a severe and bloody attack, the weapons lying at the scene held no forensic connection to him at all. Someone had killed these 2 men with extreme, methodical brutality. The crime scene told a story of planning, of patience, of a person who had struck Tay at midday and then waited 2 hours for Tony to come home. But who?
It is tempting to put a killer who's there, who's waiting, hiding, perhaps has left and come back to kill both these Singaporean men. But again, hypotheses are running amok in my brain, so entertain me for a second.
Sure.
The head being bludgeoned, Tay's head being bludgeoned around noon, could have been done by the baseball bat.
Yeah, it could have.
But the baseball bat had no evidence
Correct.
of it. The injury pattern was that of bludgeoning, which
Yes.
is a baseball bat can do very well, but there was no DNA evidence linking to that.
Exactly.
Could it be that the killer, after doing the damage to Tay, cleaned the baseball bat?
It cannot, because even then, under all sorts of technological lighting and tests, there would be blood
There would
on
be.
the bat with the brutality that Tay was killed with.
But with 2 hours in between, can you not clean the bat entirely?
Usually not, even despite a
Okay.
lot of cleaning. Luminol lights will light up crime scenes.
Okay.
Despite bleach, despite so many cleaning agents.
Where my head's
I
going
find
at?
it just hard to believe that like no DNA was found at all.
My head's going at a theory, and I don't want to paint one of the victim as the possible perpetrators, but I'm just entertaining a theory, which is this man Tony, who was behaving erratically, perhaps had something to do with the bludgeoning of his flatmate. Cleaned everything, went to class, came back, and what if Tay wasn't dead, and Tay then went on to do attack
And
Tony.
they both died in the
and they
process
both
like
died.
this? No, I highly
No.
doubt it. Imagine that. Just
I know it's
sit
very,
with
it's
that.
very implausible.
One person has been bludgeoned so badly that they haven't been able to ask for help in these 2
Yeah,
hours.
yeah,
But then
yeah.
suddenly when the killer has returned, they have the strength to kill their killer
Yeah.
and also die in the process.
Don't hit the messenger.
Also, if that's the case, if there's a scuffle, shouldn't they have died close to each other?
Crawl their way out. I mean, yeah. Again,
It's too much.
It's too much.
It's not fitting. But I agree. This is one of those cases that makes you go, what has happened behind these two doors? Like, what has gone down? And I wish I could know. For the first 9 months after the murders, Ram Tiwary was treated as a witness. He cooperated with police, gave multiple statements, walked detectives through the crime scene, and expressed grief and shock at what had happened to his flatmates. Investigators, at least publicly, were focused on finding the occupants of the white car on Willis Street that two witnesses had seen Tony get into just before his death. The car was a significant lead. Tony getting into an unfamiliar vehicle instead of walking his 5-minute route home was, as investigators noted, completely out of character. Either the people in that car had something directly to do with the murders, or they had seen something crucial. Yet, no CCTV cameras covered Willis Street. The descriptions of the vehicle varied. One witness said a white 4-door sedan, possibly a Toyota Echo. The other said the car was dark in color. The witnesses were driven around the area by police to try to spot a similar vehicle, but the exercise led nowhere. The occupants of the car, 2 or 3 Asian individuals, none known to Tony's classmates, were never identified. A man who lived near the Barker Street flat told police he'd seen a pale-colored car parked in a laneway nearby at some point after 1 p.m. on the day of the murders. A university student who had been driving down Barker Street at around 2:25, roughly the same time the ambulance arrived, reported seeing a man, olive-skinned and neither Indian nor Caucasian, walking quickly away from the direction of the duple. These were the faint outlines of something, but outlines are not a suspect. And as the months passed, police turned their gaze back to the one person who had undeniably been in that flat all afternoon, Ram Tiwary. On the 28th of May 2004, 9 months after the murders, Ram was arrested and charged with the murders of both Tay Chow Lyang and Tony Tan Po Chuan. He was 25 years old. He pleaded not guilty. 2 weeks after that, he was hit with 11 additional charges completely separate to the murders, including possessing child pornography, breaking into university dormitory to steal a computer, and making a false statement to obtain money. These additional charges painted a picture of a young man whose private life was significantly more chaotic than his public one. And the prosecution would use that picture to devastating effect at trial.
You know what this sounds like to me?
What?
Ancillary charges on somebody to paint him as a prima suspect,
Right.
because you don't have anything
Linking him to the crime itself.
crime itself. And we have seen, again, this case is one of traditional patterns that would otherwise lead you to a very conclusive result in any crime. Crimes have patterns.
Right.
Victims have patterns. Perpetrators have patterns. And here, every pattern seems to be a red herring.
Right. Like it's not what it seems to be.
It's not what it seems to be. Please tell me, what was the prosecution's case? Firstly, for the ancillary charges of things like child pornography and those things, but then also of him being linked to the murder.
We're getting right to it. So like Aryan asked, what was the prosecution's case? What was the theory of why Ram Tiwary, who had called the ambulance, who had cooperated with police from the first moment, who had no history of violence, had killed 2 of his flatmates? They said money. Specifically, rent. The prosecution alleged that Ram owed Tay Chow Lyang over 5,000 Australian dollars in unpaid rent. Ram disputed this figure, claiming that over months of shared expenses, the amounts were far more complicated and that Tay was not owed what the Crown claimed. But what the prosecution could demonstrate was that Ram was in serious financial trouble on multiple fronts. He also owed overdue tuition fees to the University of New South Wales, fees that the Singapore Armed Forces expected him to pay, and which, if they found he hadn't paid, could threaten both his scholarship and his military career. He had even at one point forwarded his girlfriend Elvira's university results to the armed forces in place of his own, in an attempt to conceal how poorly he was actually performing academically. The prosecution's theory was this. At some point on the morning of the 15th of September 2003, a dispute erupted between Ram and Tay over the overdue rent. The argument escalated. Ram struck Tay from behind. And then, having done what he had done, and knowing that Tony would be coming home after his lecture, Ram waited. When Tony came through the front door, Ram killed him too, to cover up what was already inside. As evidence of Ram's dishonesty and state of mind, the prosecution pointed to several things. Ram had told his father on the phone around the time of the murders that he didn't live at the Barker Street flat. A flat lie. He had told friends at some point that he had been out of the apartment when the killings occurred, also contradicted by what he told police. He had, investigators alleged, invented a fictitious fourth flatmate called Andrew, a name he used when splitting household expenses, apparently to reduce the amount he owed each month by spreading costs across an imaginary person. His own baseball bat, purchased just 2 days before the murders from a sports store in the city, was found at the crime scene alongside Tony's body. The prosecution posed the central question directly to the jury. Given all these lies, why would you believe anything else he said? But the defense countered that the entire case against Ram was built on speculation and rumor. There was no physical evidence directly linking him to the violence. No blood matching either victim's DNA was found on Ram's clothing. No blood was found on the towels he might have used if he had showered after committing the murders, a scenario that the Crown raised but could not prove. The 5 sets of unidentified fingerprints found throughout the flat had never been traced to anyone, least of which Ram. And the baseball bat, Ram's defense pointed out, was his. Anyone who broke into the flat could have found it and used it. The fact that it was his did not make him the one who swung it. There was also the white car on Willis Street, which the defense felt the prosecution had never adequately explained. Tony had, by multiple witnesses' account, willingly gotten into an unfamiliar vehicle shortly before he died. He had been acting strangely all day. He had gone to his lecture late, looking as though he hadn't slept. He had skipped a meeting without explanation. He had seemed, to those who saw him, like a man under some kind of pressure. The defense argued that the prosecution's narrative, Ram alone in the flat, waiting in silence for 2 hours while a man he'd lived with lay dying in the next room, was highly unlikely. Also because no blood was found on him other than his hands. But the prosecution had an interesting response to this, which some commentators described as the theory of the naked assassin, which was that Ram had stripped off his clothing to commit the murders and then redressed, which is why no blood was ever found on him other than his hands. But Ram's lawyers tried hard to dismantle this entire case.
Whoa, there's a lot happening in this
Yeah.
crime scene and its version by the defense and by the prosecution. Firstly,
Correct.
a naked assassin?
Yep.
By naked assassin, you mean buck naked?
Buck naked. Yeah.
No underwear.
No, nothing.
He's out there killing.
He's out there killing. And we've seen this before in the Rafe family killings, where when there was no DNA evidence found on any of the men, the theory purported was this, that they had stripped down to their underwears and then committed the crimes.
Wow. I mean, again, that to me is so implausible. Okay, here's where I'm at. I feel a sort of Adnan Saeed-like case forming in that it's very easy for this case to divide people as pro-Ram and anti-Ram.
Sure.
I, for some reason, whatever my biases are, skew me towards Ram. Of course, my biases are informed by my own understanding of crime scenes.
So was Ram not being the killer?
Yeah, I mean pro-Ram. So as in Ram's not the killer. Insofar as his reaction, the lack of any actual evidence except just circumstantial hypothesizing. I mean, their theories are just as good as my theories.
Yeah, they are.
Which are based on
A whole lot of nothing.
a whole lot of maybes.
And again, going back to your earlier point of there are skeletons in everyone's closet.
Yeah.
You just start digging on the one who was at the crime scene.
Yeah, I mean, there were skeletons in the closet of the man that was dead as well.
Exactly.
Right.
So you go dig up anyone's past. Probably
Yeah,
9 times out of 10, you will find something that if they were on a crime scene, you'd be like, whoa.
We all who've had flatmates in 2025, 2026 have splitwise accounts.
Right.
And often that runs very skewed with your other flatmate, but you adjust it eventually.
Right.
I'm not saying $5,000, but I've had discrepancies of at least $2,000, sometimes in my favor, sometimes in his. Like, that's not a strong enough motive.
It's
to
not.
kill two people.
Yeah.
When you have no history of violence, like I can see a fight turn into a crime of passion. It happens when you have crazy people, right? The people who have anger issues. This is at least from the picture being painted.
Yeah.
That's not the case here.
I
Nor
agree.
is the prosecution arguing that.
Right.
They're not saying this is a violent individual. They don't have any proof of that. So I'm confused. I'm confused. I'm spellbound. I don't know what to think.
The prosecution isn't saying much. You're not wrong in picking up on that and thinking that there are questions left unanswered. And that's why this case is going to go in the direction it will go. But you're right. The prosecution, I think the best way to put it is they're not saying much.
Guilty without reasonable doubt.
Yes.
Right?
Right.
Guilty without reasonable doubt.
Correct.
The white car and 3 other Asian men in it is reasonable doubt.
It is.
Everything
No
said and
DNA.
done, reasonable doubt.
Reasonable doubt. Now, at the end of the first trial in June 2006, the jury deliberated for 5 days before returning a guilty verdict on both counts. Some observers in the courtroom noted that the judge appeared genuinely surprised. Ram Tiwary was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole for the murder of Tony Tan Po Chuan and a concurrent 25 years for the murder of Tay Chow Lyang. His parents and brother, who had flown from Singapore to attend the trial, watched from the gallery as he was removed from the courtroom and taken back to prison.
Just one last thing before you move on. We have seen in jury trials the demographic makeup of the jury.
Very important.
Very important because them being of Singaporean descent makes them part of the Cantonese majority, sort of. They're from that origin. And then there is this sort of Indian origin person. Do we know anything about the jury's demographic makeup that might have informed their decision?
Unfortunately, we don't. All I know is there were 6 men, 6 women on the jury. I wish we know more. What we do know is about Sydney in general. Even back in the late 2000s, there was a significant population of Asians, South Asians,
Yeah.
Indians. So I hope that was factored in to create an unbiased jury.
Yeah.
But from the verdict, I don't know what to think of the jury. We don't have more details on it. Ram Tiwary had barely begun serving his sentence when his legal team filed a notice of appeal. The appeal process in New South Wales is methodical and slow, and it would take 2 years until December 2008 for the Court of Criminal Appeal to issue its ruling. When it did, it was a significant one. The appeal was upheld. The court determined that the evidence presented at the first trial did not, in fact, amount to a murder conviction, and that the judge had given the jury improper directions on how to weigh certain pieces of evidence. Both the conviction and the life sentence were set aside. A retrial was ordered. Ram Tiwary had spent 2 years in a maximum security prison for murder that he maintained he did not commit. He would now have to go through the entire process again. The retrial began in August 2009. This time, the defense made more use of the digital evidence. Chat logs from Tay Chow Lyang's computer were introduced to show that expenses and rent payments between the flatmates were considerably more complex than the prosecution had claimed at the first trial, and that Ram had, in fact, been making contributions to the shared household costs. The argument that Ram owed Tay 5,045 Australian dollars in rent, the foundational motive offered by the Crown, was challenged more effectively this time around. Defense lawyers also pressed harder on that unidentified white car and Tony's unusual behavior on the day of his death. After 17 hours of deliberation, significantly longer than the first jury, the second jury returned a majority guilty verdict. Ram Tiwary was convicted again. This time, he was sentenced to 48 years in prison, backdated to 2004, when he had been arrested, meaning he would not be eligible for release until deep into his old age. And he appealed again. The second appeal, heard in 2012, rested on 3 pillars. First, the tone and content of Ram's emergency call to the ambulance service, which the prosecution had used to imply guilt, and this time it was re-examined. The Court of Criminal Appeal looked at it fresh and found it consistent with the account of a man who was genuinely terrified and had genuinely discovered something horrific. Second, the court gave serious weight to the testimony about Tony and Tay's unusual behavior on the day of their deaths. Both men had behaved in ways that were starkly out of character, and neither of those departures from normalcy had anything to do with Ram. Third, and most damningly, the court scrutinized the forensic evidence, or rather, the absence of it. There was no physical material linking Ram to either murder. None. No blood, no DNA, no fibers, no footprints. For a double murder of this ferocity, the kind of sustained, prolonged, close-range attack that had taken place in that flat, the absence of any forensic connection between the accused and the victims was something the court could not get past. There were also troubling allegations about the conduct of the investigation itself. Ram's memoir, published in 2014, would later detail allegations of evidence being reported as lost from police evidence safes, of crucial evidence allegedly being withheld from the prosecution's own expert witnesses by the Director of Public Prosecutions, and of detectives whose testimony, Ram alleged, contradicted itself in ways that suggested fabrication. These are serious allegations that Ram and his legal team made, but they are his account, and they have not been independently substantiated or adjudicated in any follow-up proceedings. Now, 2 days after the second appeal hearing, on the 26th of July 2012, the New South Wales Court of Criminal Appeal handed down its next decision. Ram Tiwary was acquitted on both accounts of murder. The prosecution announced it would not appeal the decision this time. Ram Tiwary had spent 99 months, 8 years and 3 months, in a maximum security prison. After his acquittal, he was held for a further 6 weeks at the Villawood Immigration Detention Centre while prosecutors decided whether grounds existed to mount another challenge. They concluded there were none. Ram waited for a new Singaporean passport to be issued by the High Commission in Canberra, and then on the 19th of September 2012, he stepped back onto Singaporean soil for the first time since his arrest. He declined to speak to reporters, citing respect for the families of his 2 dead flatmates. Tony Tan's mother, who was 64 years old when she heard the news, told the press, "My heart is in pain. If it wasn't him, then who was it?" And that is the question that has never been answered. Here is where the case stands today, more than 20 years after the murders. Tay Chow Lyang and Tony Tan Po Chow are dead. Their killer or killers have never been identified. Ram Tiwary, the only person ever charged, was acquitted and the prosecution chose not to appeal. No new suspects have been named publicly. No new charges have been laid. In the years since his acquittal, Ram wrote his memoir named 99 Months, and by his own account has tried to rebuild a life that was hollowed out by nearly a decade in a maximum security prison. He has spoken about the difficulty of recognizing himself in photographs from that time, not just the physical changes, but a deeper sense of having been unmade and needing to put back together without any manual for how to do it. The trauma, he has said, does not leave. Tay's family, unlike Tony's, was largely unreachable by the press even at the time of the acquittal. We don't know what the years since that day have looked like for them. Tony's parents and sister participated in a Channel News Asia documentary about the case. Tony's father, his mother, his sister all sat down in front of a camera and talked about what they had lost and what justice had failed to give them. Ram and his family declined to participate. There is a detail in this case that I've been unable to shake throughout. And it's that white car on Willis Street. 2 witnesses watched Tony remove his backpack and get into that car less than 30 minutes before Ram called the ambulance. Tony was behaving odd. And Tony, who could have walked home in 5 minutes, got into a car with strangers and was driven away. When the car was on Willis Street, Tony was not yet dead. But when Ram opened his bedroom door 20 minutes later, Tony was slumped against the front door, brain damage so severe that parts of his skull were exposed. The people in that car are the last known individuals to have been with Tony Tan Po Chow before he entered his flat for the last time. They have never come forward. Police have never publicly identified them. The car, white or possibly dark, possibly a Toyota Echo, facing the wrong way on a one-way street under a no-stopping sign, has never been traced. And I truly believe some significant answers lie in the story of that car. Till we know that, the questions still stand. Why did he get into that car? Did he know the people in it? Was he told to get into it? Was he threatened? Was the car a coincidence, someone giving a friend a lift? And if so, why did those people never come forward to say so? Why, even after Ram's acquittal, left the murders formally unsolved and the real perpetrator still at large, did no one acknowledge that afternoon's step? These are not rhetorical questions, they are actual, unanswered questions that sit at the heart of this case, in which two young men were killed with extreme brutality in the middle of a Monday afternoon, in a country where they had come to rebuild their careers and a future, while their families were thousands of kilometers away in Singapore, waiting for them to come home. Today, they are still waiting for an answer. If you like what we do here at Desi Studios and absolutely love what we're wearing today, this is merch you can go buy all for yourself.
You can buy this Desi Crime merch in our YouTube store on the link down below at Karak Merch. Keep the engines at Desi Studios rolling so we can pay our videographer right behind the camera to make these amazing episodes just for you.